Hello and welcome back to the Alvis Car Company in Kenilworth. If you've been watching our videos up to this point, chances are you will have seen a visit that we had here a few weeks ago where the owner Alan gave us an amazing tour of this whole facility. But we said at the end of that video that we'd be back, and for good reason, because we've been told we can drive one of their cars. And it's just behind me. So let me open up these doors, we'll get it out, have a little chat about it, and then we'll take it out for a go. Ta-da!
Yo, 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 yo.
Well, here it is. So this is, as you've probably observed, quite a cool looking older car, except it's not quite as old as you might think. There are a few clues in and around this car that give away its age. The big first obvious one is sat right on the front. It's the number plates, which of course indicates that this is a 2013 car. It's just 10 years old, despite the fact that it is of course based on a car that would have been rolling out of the Alvis factory back in 1936. There are a few other clues though on the car, including front side repeaters here, and if you have a look through the spokes on the wheels, you'll see disc brakes on the front and on the back. Now, there is a lot that I'd like to know about this car, and admittedly, I've done very little research, but fortunately, there is somebody else here who's already driven the car out kindly for us, and that's Callum. So I'm going to invite Callum to come on in. Firstly, Callum, thank you.
Yeah,
Lovely to meet you. This is a really special thing, isn't it? Because
Yes.
you kindly told me before we started recording that this is a 1930s car that's effectively been put together using all of the parts from periods, so from the 1920s and 30s, to produce ultimately a car that can be driven on the road today and crucially be registered on the road today. But that involves having to replace quite a few bits. Now, I mentioned things like brakes and number plates. Is there anything else I missed?
So on this car, basically the chassis is an original to drawing chassis made brand new.
Wow.
So the suspension setup, so the leaf springs and the chassis wise, same wheelbase as the original car. We've got, as you said, the disc brakes, electronic servo.
Yep.
It's now running a steering rack for much lighter steering, as originally they would have had a big old heavy Miles steering box that was similar to commercial vehicles.
Okay.
We've got LED lights, so all the lighting systems LED, so it's really bright now rather than like a candle.
Yep.
And the main difference between this car and the original one is it is now running fuel injection system.
Aha.
And a manual 6-speed gearbox.
Right.
The original gearbox would have been Alvis's Synchromesh 4-speed gearbox, which was renowned for being a very bulletproof, strong gearbox.
Okay. And talk to me about the engine. So it's got a fuel injection system, which obviously would be different to how it was in the 1930s. But what engine are we using? Is it still the original block?
What it is a brand new block made from original drawings.
Correct.
So it's still using a 4.3 litre straight six engine.
Wow. Fantastic. Well, this is all very exciting and very interesting. But what I really want to do is take it for a drive. And I've been told that you're quite happy to jump in the passenger seat with me. And perhaps whilst we're out on the road, you can fill me in on a few other bits and pieces and see what this thing's all about, see what it's like to drive.
Sure.
Perfect. So what are the things I need to know then before we swap over and I take to the wheel?
First gear's quite far over. It's almost as if you're going in reverse.
Okay.
It's quite easy to get third. I mean, that's fifth now. It's quite easy to get the gears because it's a very tight box. Right. Whereas the original box, you were right far over, almost like a Land Rover box. Big shift gate.
Got it. Yeah.
It's a really tight box now. This is a Tremec 6-speed, so they use these gearboxes in almost anything now.
Right.
They use them in street cars, anything upwards of almost 1,000 odd horsepower.
Amazing. And I'm noticing other modern luxuries have got a 12-volt cigarette lighter here.
Cigarette lighters.
So you can plug in your phone and
Yes.
Keep that charged.
The
A lot of the switch gear as well is...
all of these gauges are electronic gauges.
Really? Wow.
Yes. They've got vintage style fronts on them.
Well, it picks up fairly well, doesn't it?
They're a very nice torquey engine. The original autocar test back in 1937-38 tested this car, and you had a 0 to 50 time of 7.3 seconds. It was one of the fastest production cars at that time available.
Wow. That's pretty good, actually, isn't
Yeah,
it?
even by today's standards.
Yeah.
So this was one of the first production cars that would do 100 mile an hour.
Wow.
Back in 1936, 1937, when they were tested. Yeah. It's a car that you can happily sit at 60 mile an hour all day in, cruising down A roads.
The ride's not bad, either, isn't it? Even going over potholes and lumps and bumps.
This still uses the old spring suspension.
Yeah.
The only upgrade suspension-wise is we've got Spax shock absorbers.
Got it.
Rather than the old hydraulic telescopic ones.
Oh, right. My turn to drive this. I did intend, before we set off, when you were driving, I was going to ask all sorts of questions like, what do I need to know about with regards to brakes and things, and I just forgot. So we'll figure it out as we go. But
Fine.
we'll put
Brakes are brilliant.
Oh,
They're
good.
normal, just like any other car brakes.
Perfect. Great stuff. So, clutch is there, brake is there, accelerator is there.
Yep.
Jolly good.
Normal conventional layout.
Excellent. No centre throttles. And does it just twist all the way?
Yep, just turn the key all the way.
And we're alive. Fantastic. So you must get to drive these quite often on these local roads.
Yes, every car that comes in that we service or look after, we do an initial test, and once all the work is done or the car is going to go back, we then do the final road test. So we always drive the cars to make sure how they're driving, how they're performing, how safe they are, and the customers get full reports on their cars.
Great. What tends to be the typical job then? When a car like this comes in for a service or a repair, is there a typical list of things that need to be worked on or checked?
Different Alvises have slightly different typical things you have to look at. Certain ones are weaker in other places than the other, but that's the same with all cars.
Yeah.
For example, on the 60s cars, you have to look at your chassis, make sure there's no rust setting in.
Yeah.
Whereas on these cars, they've got a nice C-section chassis, and they don't rust at all. These have all got bronze suspension bushes.
Oh wow.
So they obviously wear, you've got metal pins on metal bushes. They're usually what you look at. They're what wear the most, because obviously it's all grease nipples.
Yeah.
Whereas on the 60s cars, you've got rubber bushes on the leaf springs.
You soon get into the rhythm of it, don't you? It's
Yes.
not, it's not at
It's
all.
a car you can jump in
Yeah.
and drive.
Which is really surprising, because I assumed there'd be a certain element of it's going to take a while for me to get used to the feel of the brakes or the clutch or the steering, but it is very similar to, say, driving even like a 1960s, 1970s classic
Yes.
car. It's a good noise, and I like the
Yes.
fact that everything's happening up front, like in front of us. It's actually very little exhaust note from the back.
Yeah, it's got quite a nice exhaust note, but obviously with the cats, it's much more
Yeah.
muted compared to an original car.
Yes.
The original car would have pipes coming straight out, a single silencer box, straight out the rear.
There must be one or two customers that ask about getting these built that then say, could you, wink wink, have the forget to put the cats in? Does that happen, or do you have to put them through?
No, we've not had no customers ask that yet. Never say never.
Never say never. And remind me, what's the build time on one of these? If I wanted to walk down into the sales office when we get back and place an order, from the minute I give you my deposit, how soon do I get my Alvis?
Currently we have 3 in the build, so there would probably be at least maybe 2 years, 1.5 years.
It's quite a surreal experience, really.
I love driving these pre-war cars,
Yeah, me
even
too.
the original ones. I'd much rather drive one of these than any of the 60s cars.
Yeah?
It's a much more connected, more attached drive.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's one of the things I frequently talk about in our podcast. I was very lucky, I've been very lucky actually over the years to drive a lot of pre-war cars. And you're absolutely right, what you've just said there. The connection between what the car is doing, the machine and man coming together. You feel absolutely everything that's going on with the suspension, with the brakes, with the throttle. You know when it's not quite fueling right. Obviously, that's not going to be an issue in this. And of course, you've got the luxury of electronic ignition. But that connection between how far your foot goes down on the throttle and the noise both up front and behind. I love that torquey feel, but also the noise that comes with it. It's quite satisfying, isn't it? Now, one of the other things that was mentioned before we set off was the fact that the car itself, this exact car right now, is being fueled by e-fuels.
Yes.
So how did that come about, and how easy is that to do? Because we're now hearing about all these exciting developments in the world of new fuels, synthetic fuels, e-fuels. I'm yet to get my head wrapped around what it all means.
Yeah, it's only really in, to be honest, in development stages at the moment.
Yeah.
Hence why Vista was the only place we were able to get it, because they've got a specific station there purely for e-fuels.
Wow.
So this was at the Vista Scramble on display.
Yeah.
About a month ago. That's when it was built up, and as you can see, it seems to be performing perfectly well.
It's amazing, yeah. Let's talk about fuel consumption, which is a very motoring journalist question to ask. What are we talking here? I'm guessing it's not going to be battling many brand new
I
Priuses.
don't believe we've thoroughly tested through MPG.
Good. Don't bother. That's
I
what
can tell
say.
you now that the original carbs car, 12.
Right. Well, that's not too bad.
No,
I don't
so
think.
I imagine this will be somewhere in the 20s.
Yeah. It's perfect.
It's not thoroughly tested. We can't say, yes, it definitely does this.
Yeah.
This is not something you should consider really when you're
No,
owning one of these cars.
You're
You're
looking
owning it for driving it.
Exactly.
If you're concerned about how much it's costing of running,
It's not
you
the car
shouldn't
for you.
really own this type of car.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. And then, as you say, you know, using e-fuels or synthetic fuels, there's almost you're countering that argument of, or reducing that guilt complex that I think a lot of drivers these days are feeling, especially those with expensive, luxurious classic cars. There's that element of feeling like, oh, okay, there is a bit of a climate crisis. But in driving these beautiful old classic cars, firstly, you're reducing the requirement to build new cars, which is an extremely carbon-intensive
Yes,
process.
especially currently electric with all the mining for all the minerals in the batteries.
Yeah, absolutely. So with this, you're keeping an old car on the road, you're keeping it going, you're fueling it with e-fuels. It's a win-win.
Yeah,
You can drive it without guilt.
Yeah, e-fuels would be a great future to keep these old cars,
Yeah.
and basically all the cars that are currently running on the road, because if all of a sudden they say ban all petrol cars, how many millions of cars are now just laying scrap dormant?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm so impressed with how this feels. Like, yes, okay, there's a bit of play in the steering, but you're going to forgive that because of firstly, the size of the wheel, but
Yeah,
also...
you've got a massive wheel and big bouncy tyres still.
Yeah, absolutely. But the brakes, they feel really encouraging.
Yeah,
Doesn't
you can
feel-
stamp on them. What we're using is, we've got AP Racing front calipers.
Oh, really?
4-pot calipers.
Wow.
Vented wheel discs. They're the same as what you would see on a track day car. You pick them up, they're a great big massive chunky disc that will stop almost anything from any speed.
Amazing.
Big thick Ferodo racing pads.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, just touching the brakes there, you can feel there's that bite. You know, you're aware it's a heavy car, but it's not
Yeah, it doesn't stop like an old heavy car.
No.
It stops like a modern car. You hit the brakes and it's an emergency stop.
Absolutely.
It doesn't continue slowly rolling like it would slightly on drums.
And you and I both know what it's like when you suddenly need to stop in a pre-war car that has pre-war brakes, and you go,
Yes.
ooh, there's that horrible little
Yeah.
moment. Now I think I can smell the e-fuels. It's a
Yes,
different
there is a slightly
exhaust tone.
different smell to it.
Yeah. Obviously you can't benefit that, dear viewer, because of course you're just watching us online, but it's a slightly kind of rubbery metallic smell. So, there we go, a 1936 but not 1936 Alvis Vanden Plas. I said it whilst we were out driving, and I'm going to say it again now because I think it's significant, and it's the fact that driving a car like this, I genuinely feel quite privileged, quite lucky to do so, because you get to experience something when driving a car like this which most other road users would perhaps never even think about, and that is that very real connection between you as a human being and this as the machine. The way that the steering feels, the way the brakes feel, the way the gearbox feels, it all is very visceral. It's about as raw and as connected as it could possibly be. But then with this, a 2013 version of a 1936 car, you get the best of both worlds. You get that amazing, glorious styling with all of the modern conveniences, brakes that you can trust and lean on, a gearbox that you know isn't going to let you down, steering that isn't going to break your wrists or leave you with a broken back by the end of a long drive. This thing absolutely does it all. It's a shame in a way that the waiting list is so long, but then I completely understand why. If you're in the market for something like this, I can't really imagine why you'd look anywhere else other than the Alvis. Thank you so much for watching this week's video. A huge thank you to Alvis for inviting me along and letting me drive this glorious car. If you want to find out more about Alvis, scroll down to the notes below where you'll see links through to the company website as well as their social media feeds. And take a look at our website too, because there will be a written article about this very car and already an article about our previous visit, which you would have seen in our previous video, where we had the tour of the facility to see all of the areas where these cars are put together with all of the components that have been used to make this amazing car. Don't forget to hit subscribe and hit that little bell notification as well if you want to see the next videos that we upload, because we still have plenty more to come. And as well, don't forget to check out our podcast. That's our biggest output every single Monday morning. The Driven Chat podcast is out there for your listening pleasure with a special guest from the automotive world each week. For now, I will say thank you again for watching and goodbye.